The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of her father's footsteps echoing across the hallway. I could still feel the weight of his words burning in my chest. She will be married to him, and that's final. My heart had clenched when I heard it, as if the air had been stolen from the room. They didn't see her the way I did. They didn't know her laughter, the way her smile could light up even the darkest moment, or the way her hands trembled when she was forced into something she didn't want. To them, she was a daughter to be traded, a promise to be kept, a responsibility to hand off to some man who didn't know her soul. To me, she was everything. I couldn't let them take her away. I remembered the first time she had confessed her fear to me. Her eyes had glistened under the dim light of the street lamp as she whispered, "They want me to marry him. They think this is right for me." Her voice cracked, and I could see the storm in her chest, a war between obedience and her true self. I had grabbed her hand then, feeling the cold trembling of her fingers. "You don't belong to him," I had said, "you belong to yourself." I didn't say she belonged to me, though my heart screamed it. But now, with the wedding looming, the silence pressing against every wall of her home, I knew I couldn't just sit back and whisper comforting words. I had to show everyone who she really was. I had to fight for her. Her family thought they knew best. They saw her as fragile, someone who needed protection, someone who would only be safe if she obeyed tradition. But what they didn't see was her fire, the quiet strength in the way she endured their words, the way she tried not to cry in front of them. I watched her carry their weight on her shoulders day after day, and I hated how they broke her spirit with every should and must. They didn't care about her happiness, only about appearances. To them, love didn't matter, truth didn't matter. What mattered was keeping her inside the box they built for her. And I, standing outside, was the one thing they wanted erased from her story. The night before they announced her engagement, she came to me. I can still feel the desperation in her hug, the way she clung to me as if I was the only piece of reality she had left. "I don't want this," she whispered against my shoulder, "but they won't listen." Her tears slid down my neck, warm and aching, and all I could do was hold her tighter, trying to pour every ounce of courage I had into her shaking body. I wanted to tell her that I would burn down every wall for her, that I would shout her truth until the whole world had no choice but to hear it. Instead, I kissed her hair and said, "Then let them try. You're not alone in this." Inside me, fear and determination battled each other. Fear that they were stronger than us, that their voices would drown ours, that tradition would crush her into silence. But stronger than that fear was the raw determination that no one would claim her future but her. I had already lost too many nights watching her suffocate under expectations, and I refused to let her lose herself completely. They might have thought love was something that had to follow rules, but love like ours was wild. It wasn't meant to be hidden. It wasn't meant to be caged. When the morning of the engagement came, the house buzzed with preparation. People smiled, congratulated her parents, whispered about the perfect match that had been arranged. She walked around like a ghost, her eyes dim, her lips pressed into a line. I stood at the edge of the crowd, watching, burning inside, wanting to scream. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure someone could hear it. She glanced at me once across the room, just a second, but it was enough. In her eyes, I saw the same fire I had fallen in love with, the spark that refused to die even under all that pressure. That single glance told me everything. She didn't want him, she wanted me. I knew then that silence was no longer an option. I couldn't stand by while they dressed her in chains disguised as flowers. I couldn't let her smile be stolen. It wasn't just about love, it was about her life, her freedom, her right to choose. They wanted to give her away, but I was going to show them that she wasn't theirs to give. She wasn't a prize. She wasn't a possession. She was her own, and she was mine in the way hearts claim each other when the world refuses to understand. That day, standing in a room full of expectations and lies, I promised myself one thing: I would fight for her until the very last breath. No matter what they said. No matter who stood in the way. She was worth every battle, every scar, every storm I had to walk through. And I was ready. Because loving her wasn't a choice, it was the truth of who I was. And no tradition, no arranged marriage, no man they forced into her life could ever change that. The announcement was made in a way that felt more like a verdict than a celebration. The living room was filled with family members, neighbors, and the man they had chosen for her. He sat with a proud smile, as if he had already claimed her, while she sat quietly, her eyes lowered, her hands clasped together in her lap. I stood behind the group, pressed against the wall, watching her every movement. She looked like a flower forced into a vase where it didn't belong. Her silence wasn't shyness, it was defeat, a silence that screamed louder than words. I hated that no one else could see it, or maybe they didn't want to. To them, this was normal. To me, it was unbearable. When her father cleared his throat and spoke about how lucky she was to be chosen, something inside me burned. They didn't see her as lucky, they saw themselves as lucky to be rid of her responsibility. He spoke about tradition, about respect, about family honor. Each word was like a chain tightening around her. And when he asked the man beside her if he accepted her as his bride, the man's wide grin made me sick. He said yes without hesitation, as if she were a prize to be collected, not a person with a heart of her own. My fists clenched at my sides, nails digging into my palms until I could feel the sting. She looked up once, just briefly, when her mother touched her shoulder. Her eyes scanned the room until they found me. That single moment stretched into eternity. Her lips trembled, her eyes begged silently, as if asking me, "Will you let them do this?" That was the moment I knew I couldn't just stand there anymore. I couldn't wait for the right time, couldn't hope for things to change on their own. They were planning her life right in front of me, stripping her voice away. And if I stayed quiet, I would be betraying her. I took a step forward, then another. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath short, but my voice came out stronger than I thought it would. She doesn't want this. The room went still, as if the walls themselves were shocked. All eyes turned to me. Some faces showed confusion, others anger, and some disbelief. Her father's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing in fury. "This is not your place to speak," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut. But I didn't move back. I didn't lower my gaze. I kept my eyes locked on hers, giving her the strength she had been denied for so long. "She is not happy," I said again, louder this time. My voice shook, but not with fear, with rage and determination. "You are not listening to her. You are choosing for her. But she has the right to choose for herself." Gasps filled the room. Her mother stood quickly, her face pale, whispering harshly for me to leave before I embarrassed them further. But embarrassment didn't matter to me. What mattered was the girl sitting with tears in her eyes, caught between duty and love. The man who was supposed to marry her frowned and leaned back, clearly uncomfortable. "She hasn't said she doesn't want this," he said calmly, as though trying to convince himself that silence was consent. But silence was her prison. And I wasn't going to let it be mistaken for agreement. I took another step closer, closing the distance between us, ignoring the protests and the sharp voices telling me to stop. My chest ached as I looked at her, waiting, hoping she would find her voice in this storm. Finally, she spoke. Her words were soft at first, almost fragile, but they carried a strength that silenced every corner of the room. "I don't want this," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I don't want him." Her voice cracked but grew steadier. "I never wanted this." The room erupted with shock, anger, disbelief. Her father slammed his hand against the table, shouting that she was being brainwashed, that I had poisoned her mind. Her mother cried, pleading with her to think about their reputation, their future. Relatives whispered, their voices dripping with judgment. But through it all, she looked at me, and I saw the spark of freedom light up inside her. I moved closer until I was right by her side. I didn't touch her, not yet, because I wanted her to make the choice. Slowly, she reached for my hand, her trembling fingers sliding into mine. That single act was louder than anything else in the room. Gasps filled the air again, but I no longer cared. Neither did she. In that moment, holding her hand, she was telling the world that she belonged to no one's expectation, no man's claim. She was choosing herself. And in choosing herself, she was choosing me. Her father's face turned red, his voice shaking with rage as he shouted for me to leave his house. He called me a disgrace, an intruder, someone who had ruined his daughter. But I stood firm. I squeezed her hand, anchoring her, reminding her she wasn't alone anymore. "You can call me whatever you want," I said firmly, my voice rising above the chaos, "but I will never apologize for loving her. And she doesn't have to apologize for being who she is." The room boiled with anger, yet at the center of it, she and I were steady, a storm within a storm, unshaken. She took a deep breath then, lifting her chin higher than I had ever seen. Her voice no longer cracked when she spoke. "I love her," she said, and the room fell into stunned silence. The words hung heavy in the air, undeniable, unshakable, real. The man who had thought he would marry her shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly ready to leave. Her mother covered her mouth with her hands, tears of disbelief falling. And her father, with eyes full of fire, turned away, unable to accept what he had just heard. But for us, that moment was everything. The truth was no longer hidden. The battle had begun, and the world could no longer pretend. She was mine, not because I claimed her, but because she had chosen to stand beside me, even when everything was against us. And I knew, no matter how hard the road ahead would be, nothing and no one could erase the love that now lived in the open. The days after that night felt like walking through fire. Her father's anger didn't die down, it grew like a storm that refused to pass. Every word he spoke was a weapon, every silence was a wall built to push her further away from me. Her mother cried endlessly, begging her to reconsider, pleading with her not to bring shame to the family. Relatives whispered cruel things, twisting our love into something dirty, something wrong. They looked at me like I had stolen her, like I had poisoned her, when all I had done was love her openly, without chains. But what hurt most was the weight on her shoulders. I could see it in her eyes, the pressure of choosing between the life they demanded and the life her heart longed for. And every night, when she looked at me, I knew she was terrified but also braver than she had ever been. We would meet in secret, not because we were ashamed, but because her family watched her like a prisoner. The first time I saw her after the confrontation, she ran into my arms and didn't let go for a long time. Her body shook as she whispered, "I don't know how long I can keep this up. They won't stop." I held her tighter, burying my face in her hair, inhaling the only place I ever felt at home. "You're not alone," I told her. "We'll face this together. They can scream, they can threaten, but they can't erase who you are." My voice was steady, but inside, I was terrified. I knew the world wasn't kind to people like us. I knew the price we might pay. But I also knew that living a lie would destroy her far more than their hatred ever could. Everywhere she went, the pressure followed. At home, they tried to keep her busy with chores, with relatives visiting, with lectures that never ended. At church, whispers followed her like shadows, people speaking in hushed voices about sin and shame. Even in the market, old women shook their heads, their eyes sharp with judgment. She told me once that it felt like she was drowning, that every breath she took was stolen from someone else's expectations. But then she would look at me and smile, a smile that was fragile and strong all at once. "When I see you, it feels like breathing again," she said, her voice trembling. Those words wrapped around my heart and reminded me why I couldn't let her go, why I had to fight no matter how impossible it seemed. One evening, her father locked her in her room after another argument. He shouted through the door that she had disgraced them, that she had betrayed everything they stood for. I stood outside in the dark, staring at her window, hearing faint sobs I couldn't reach. My chest ached with helplessness. I wanted to climb up, break the lock, carry her away, but I knew if I acted recklessly, they would tighten the chains even more. So I stayed there in the shadows, whispering her name softly, letting her know that I hadn't left, that I never would. And when she heard me, she came to the window, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes red from crying. She pressed her hand to the glass, and I pressed mine against it from the other side. That silent touch, separated by thin glass, felt stronger than any words. It was our promise that even when the world tried to cage her, love would always find a way through. The man they wanted her to marry didn't push anymore, not after hearing her speak so firmly. But his silence didn't feel like respect, it felt like humiliation he couldn't swallow. He avoided her now, avoided her family, and I knew deep down he was more concerned about his pride than her happiness. Yet her father clung to the plan, too stubborn to let go of the idea. He wanted control, not her joy. And the more he tried to force her, the more determined I became. One night, as we sat hidden under the old oak tree near the edge of town, she looked at me with tears streaming down her cheeks. "What if they never accept us? What if they never stop?" Her voice broke, and I grabbed her hands, holding them tightly. "Then we make our own path," I said firmly. "We don't need their permission to love. We don't need their blessing to be happy. You are enough, we are enough, and the world will just have to live with it." She leaned into me then, her forehead resting against mine, and whispered, "I'm so scared." My arms wrapped around her, and I kissed her trembling lips, slow and steady, like a promise. "I'm scared too," I admitted, "but courage isn't about not being scared. It's about loving anyway, even when it hurts." We stayed there until the stars covered the sky, holding each other as if the universe itself was wrapping us in its arms. For the first time in weeks, she smiled with her whole heart, and I knew we would survive as long as we had moments like this to hold on to. But survival wasn't going to be easy. The gossip grew louder, the anger sharper. People who had once smiled at us in the street now crossed to the other side. Friends she had known since childhood pulled away, as if our love was contagious. Yet even as the world tried to shrink us into silence, we stood taller, holding hands in the shadows, whispering dreams of a future where we wouldn't have to hide. Each kiss, each stolen moment, was a rebellion. Each time she laughed with me, it was proof that love could not be buried, no matter how deep they tried to push it. And even though I could feel the storm still gathering around us, I knew we had something stronger than all their hate combined. The breaking point came quietly, not with shouts or slammed doors, but with the heavy silence that lingered after her father's threats no longer worked. He had tried everything, anger, guilt, shame, even locking her away, but she no longer bent the way she once did. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet defiance, her shoulders straighter, her voice steadier. But I could see how much it cost her. Every time she stood her ground, she paid a price in tears she shed when no one else was watching. I was there to catch those tears, to remind her that her fight wasn't in vain. Yet I could feel the exhaustion building in her, a weight that threatened to break her if we didn't find a way out. Love gave us courage, but courage alone couldn't shield us from the world pressing in. One evening, as we sat together under the dim glow of her bedside lamp, she whispered words I had feared but also expected. "I can't keep living like this. If I stay here, they'll suffocate me. They'll try until I have nothing left of myself. Her voice cracked, and I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Then we leave," I said without hesitation. "We don't have to wait for their permission. We don't need their blessing. If they refuse to see us, then we'll build a life where no one can close their eyes." She looked at me with fear swimming in her gaze. "Do you mean it? Leave everything? Leave everyone?" Her question carried the weight of every memory she had, every bond tied to her childhood home. But I nodded firmly. "Yes. Because what good are walls and familiar streets if they crush you? You deserve to live free, not trapped in someone else's dream." That night, we began to plan. Quietly, carefully, with hushed voices and trembling hands. It wasn't about running away in rebellion, it was about survival. We wrote down the small things we would need, places we might go, people who could help us if we had no one else. The thought of leaving everything behind was terrifying, yet there was something liberating in it too. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream out loud. She spoke about mornings where we could wake up together without fear, about walking hand in hand without watching who was looking, about laughter that didn't have to be muffled. Her voice grew lighter with every word, and I could see her spirit beginning to rise from the ashes of what they had tried to bury, but reality did not loosen its grip easily. Her father grew suspicious of her sudden calmness, as if he could sense that something had shifted. He pressed harder, warning her that the world outside would never accept her, that she would end up broken and abandoned. Her mother begged her to reconsider, tears staining her cheeks, begging her to stop this nonsense before it ruined them all. Neighbors whispered louder than ever, and even the air in the house felt heavy with judgment. Yet through it all, she held on. Every cruel word seemed to push her closer to me, as though their rejection only carved out more space for our love to grow. One night, when the weight of it all pressed too heavily on her, she collapsed into my arms, sobbing until she couldn't breathe. "What if we don't make it? What if we run, and everything falls apart? What if we end up worse than this?" Her fear clawed at my own, but I held her tighter, resting my forehead against hers. "Then at least we will fail together. At least we will fall knowing we chose love, not chains. I would rather lose everything with you than live a lifetime pretending you don't belong to me." My voice trembled with truth, and she looked at me as if the world had stopped spinning. Slowly, she kissed me, soft and aching, and in that kiss I felt her decision forming, the courage gathering inside her like a storm ready to break. The decision to leave didn't erase the fear, but it gave us power. Every secret meeting became a step toward freedom. Every whisper of plans was a rebellion against the cage they built. We began gathering small things, money saved in hidden envelopes, clothes folded and tucked away where no one would look. We knew the risk, knew that discovery could make things worse, but the thought of staying was far more unbearable. And with each passing day, I could see her standing taller, her eyes brighter, her voice stronger. She was no longer just enduring, she was preparing, she was fighting, she was choosing herself. But what struck me most was the change in the way she looked at me. Before, her love had been mixed with fear, with hesitation, with the shadows of shame forced on her by others. Now, when she looked at me, it was different. It was raw, unshakable, almost fierce. She no longer whispered our love like a secret, she spoke it like a vow. One evening, as we sat together beneath the stars, she said in a voice steadier than I'd ever heard, "They tried to marry me to a man, but my heart has already chosen. They can take everything else away, but they can't take that." The words poured into me like fire, and I knew then that no matter what we faced, we were unbreakable together. It was not the end of the struggle, if anything, it was the beginning of a harder road. But the choice had been made. We would no longer let them write her life for her. We would no longer let silence define her. The girl who once trembled in fear now stood beside me with courage in her veins, and I knew that the love we carried, fragile and fierce, was stronger than all their chains. That night, under the weight of the stars and the whispers of the wind, I promised her again and again, I would not let the world bury us. I would fight until my last breath to keep her free, to keep her mine. And she, with tears glistening but a smile blooming through them, promised me the same. The night we finally decided to leave felt heavier than any night before. The air was thick with the kind of silence that comes before a storm, and my chest ached with the weight of what we were about to do. She sat beside me, her hand in mine, her eyes fixed on the floor as if trying to memorize every crack in the wooden boards beneath us. She wasn't crying anymore, her tears had dried days ago. What was left now was something harder, sharper, like steel hidden beneath fragile skin. "If we don't go now," she whispered, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear it, "I'll never have the courage again." I turned to her, my hand brushing against her cheek, and whispered back, "Then we go now. Together." My words were steady, but inside me a storm raged, full of fear, full of hope, full of the desperate need to keep her safe. We had spent weeks quietly preparing, gathering small things that wouldn't be noticed if they disappeared, some money, clothes, a book she loved too much to leave behind. Each item was more than just survival, it was a piece of her that she refused to let the world take away. But no amount of preparation could quiet the pounding in my chest as we crept through the house that night. Her father's snores echoed faintly down the hallway, her mother's restless shifting in the next room. Every step felt like walking on glass, each creak of the floorboards a betrayal threatening to wake the entire world. Her hand squeezed mine tightly, so tightly that her nails dug into my skin, but I welcomed the pain. It reminded me she was still with me, still choosing me. When we finally stepped outside, the cool night air hit us like freedom. For a moment, we just stood there, breathing it in, letting it wash over us. She tilted her head back, staring up at the stars, and whispered, "I've never felt this alive." Her words broke something inside me, a realization of how much she had been suffocating, how much of herself had been caged by walls and rules that never belonged to her. I wrapped my arms around her from behind, pulling her close, and said, "This is only the beginning. We'll find a place where you never have to feel trapped again." My voice cracked, but she didn't seem to notice. She was too busy drinking in the night sky like it was her first taste of life. We walked for hours, our steps quick, our hearts louder than the crickets in the grass. Every sound behind us made us turn, terrified someone had noticed, someone was following. But no one came. The world was asleep, and for once, it felt like it had given us the smallest mercy. When we reached the edge of town, she stopped and turned to me, her face pale but her eyes burning with something fierce. "Do you think we'll ever be happy?" she asked, her voice trembling. I cupped her face in my hands, forcing her to meet my eyes. "Happiness isn't something they give us," I said softly. "It's something we take. And I promise you, we'll take it together." She leaned into my touch then, her lips brushing against mine, a kiss so full of desperation and hope that it felt like a vow written on our skin. The road ahead wasn't easy. We didn't have much, only what we could carry. But in those early hours, walking side by side through the dark, it didn't matter. We laughed quietly about nothing, whispered dreams of small apartments with sunlit windows, of mornings where we'd wake up tangled in each other without fear of being found. She told me about the places she wanted to see, the books she wanted to read without hiding them, the songs she wanted to sing without lowering her voice. Her words poured out like water from a broken dam, as if she had been holding them back her entire life, and now she finally had the chance to let them flow. Listening to her, I realized something. Freedom wasn't just leaving, it was finally being able to imagine a future. But as much as we dreamed, reality still pressed close behind us. Money was thin, trust even thinner. We avoided crowded places, afraid of running into someone who might recognize her, afraid of whispers reaching her family before we were far enough away. More than once, I caught her flinching at shadows, clutching my arm as if the darkness itself might drag her back. Each time, I reminded her, we're moving forward. We're not going back. And slowly, I saw her believe it. She began to walk with her chin higher, her steps stronger, her eyes focused ahead instead of behind. The girl who once trembled in fear now walked beside me like she had finally found her wings. One morning, after walking until our feet ached and our clothes were damp with dew, we stopped by a river. She knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands, watching it slip through her fingers. "It feels like us," she said quietly. "No matter how much they try to hold me, I'll slip away. I'll keep moving." I sat beside her, letting my hand brush against hers, and whispered, "You're not just moving, you're flowing toward who you're meant to be." She turned to me then, her eyes shining with tears she wasn't ashamed of anymore, and kissed me so deeply it felt like the world itself had paused to watch. We rested there for a while, letting the water carry away the weight of our fears. For the first time in what felt like forever, she laughed without hesitation, her head thrown back, her joy ringing out into the air. I watched her and thought to myself, this is why we left. This is why we'll keep fighting. Not just for love, but for the right to laugh, to dream, to live without chains. The journey ahead was uncertain, maybe even dangerous, but in that moment, with her hand in mine and her laughter spilling into the morning, I believed with all my heart that we were going to make it. The first days of our freedom were filled with both relief and fear. We were finally outside the cage that had held her for so long, but every step carried the weight of uncertainty. We didn't know where we would sleep the next night or how long the little money we had would last. What we did know was that we had each other, and that truth alone was stronger than all the doubts whispering at the back of our minds. At night, we found shelter where we could, sometimes in an old barn, sometimes beneath the quiet shelter of trees. She would curl into me, her head resting on my chest, her heartbeat steady against mine. In those moments, the world around us didn't matter. The stars became our ceiling, the earth our bed, and the sound of her soft breathing was the only lullaby I ever needed. But freedom was not without its scars. She carried the voices of her family inside her, even when miles stretched between us and them. Sometimes, when she thought I was asleep, I heard her whisper apologies into the night, as if her parents could hear her across the distance. "I'm sorry for leaving," she murmured once, her voice breaking, but I couldn't keep pretending. I held her tighter, my lips brushing against her hair, and whispered back, "You didn't betray them, you chose yourself. That's the bravest thing you've ever done." Still, I could feel her pain. Love had given her wings, but those wings had torn through roots that had been buried deep for years. And letting go of those roots, even when they hurt, left wounds that would take time to heal. We began to find small jobs in the towns we passed through. I worked wherever I could, cleaning, lifting, running errands, while she helped in shops or tended to children who quickly adored her gentle smile. People didn't know our story. To them, we were just two young women traveling together. For once, there were no whispers behind our backs, no judgment heavy in the air. We were anonymous, and anonymity felt like a gift. In the quiet moments, when she laughed freely with strangers or hummed softly while she worked, I caught glimpses of the life we were building, ordinary yet precious. A life where her smile wasn't a rebellion but simply a reflection of her happiness. Still, there were nights when fear returned like an old ghost. She worried about her father finding us, about being dragged back into the life she had escaped. Once, when a man stared too long at us in the market, she clutched my hand so tightly I thought her bones might break. I turned to her quickly, whispering, "It's all right, it's just a look. He can't take you from me." But I knew her fear wasn't irrational. The past had left marks on her, shadows that followed us even under the brightest skies. And each time I saw her flinch, my resolve hardened. I promised myself that I would be her shield, her home, the place where no one could touch her without her consent. As days turned into weeks, something remarkable happened. The fear didn't vanish, but it transformed into strength. She started walking taller, her laughter louder, her words bolder. She began to speak about dreams she once buried so deep she thought they were gone. She wanted to study again, to learn, to write her own story in her own words. She wanted to live in a home filled with light and books and plants, where she could breathe without asking permission. Listening to her, I felt like I was watching her soul bloom before my eyes. And with every dream she shared, I silently vowed to help her reach it, no matter how far we had to go. One night, as we sat by a small fire we had built in the woods, she looked at me with eyes so full of love that it made my chest ache. "They tried to make me belong to someone else," she said quietly, "but my heart always knew it belonged to you." The firelight danced across her face, and for a moment, she looked untouchable, as though the universe itself had placed her there just for me. I reached for her, pulling her close, and kissed her with all the love I carried, a love that had survived walls, whispers, and wounds. That kiss was not just love, it was survival, it was defiance, it was a promise etched into the night. We weren't naive. We knew the road ahead would still be hard. The world was not built to welcome us with open arms. But with every step, we grew stronger. With every smile, every touch, every whispered dream, we carved out a space that belonged to us and no one else. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. And watching her live, watching her reclaim every piece of herself that had once been stolen, made me realize something too. They had tried to silence her, tried to marry her to a man who could never know her heart. But in trying to erase her truth, they had only made it shine brighter. That night, as the fire burned low and the stars stretched endlessly above us, I held her close and whispered, "We've already won. No matter what happens tomorrow, we've already won. Because you are free. Because we are us." She pressed her forehead to mine, tears glistening in her eyes, and for the first time since this journey began, she whispered back, "Yes. We're free." The first glimpse of stability came when we stumbled upon a small town nestled between rolling hills and endless fields. It wasn't like the place she had left behind, where everyone knew her name and her family's shadow stretched over every corner. Here, people were too busy with their own lives to pry into ours. We found work at a little cafe on the edge of town, run by an older woman who asked no questions when we told her we needed a chance. She gave us aprons, smiles, and a place to earn enough to eat. It wasn't much, but for us it felt like the start of something real. Every morning, we would wake up in a tiny rented room above a shop, the smell of bread and coffee drifting through the window, and for the first time, her smile didn't look borrowed, it belonged to her. At the cafe, I watched her come alive in ways I had never seen before. She laughed with customers, remembered their orders, and let her charm flow in the smallest of gestures. People who came in regularly began to greet her warmly, their voices free of judgment, their eyes seeing her simply as herself. I stood beside her, sometimes working, sometimes just watching, and I felt pride swell in me like sunlight breaking through clouds. Each smile she gave was a piece of her reclaiming what had been stolen. And every time I caught her glancing at me across the counter, her eyes soft and steady, I was reminded that she had chosen this life with me. Not forced, not trapped, but chosen. Evenings became our sanctuary. After long hours of work, we would climb the narrow stairs to our small room, exhausted but happy. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, yet it felt like a palace because it was ours. We would sit by the window, watching the town settle into quiet, sharing stories of the day, dreams of the future, and fears we still carried. Sometimes she would confess her nightmares, the echoes of her father's voice, the sting of her mother's disappointment, but each time, I would hold her close, whispering that she was no longer theirs to control. Slowly, those nightmares began to fade, replaced by softer dreams of what lay ahead. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, she turned to me with a look I couldn't quite name. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for mine. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Leaving everything? Choosing me, even though it meant losing so much?" Her question struck me, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I could see the fear behind it. The fear that someday I might see her as a burden instead of a blessing. I cupped her face in my hands and leaned in until our foreheads touched. "You're not something I gave up everything for," I whispered. "You're everything I ever wanted." I didn't lose, I found the only thing that matters. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from sorrow. She kissed me then, slow and tender, and the world outside that window seemed to fade away. As weeks passed, her strength grew in ways that amazed me. She began writing again, filling notebooks with words she had once been too afraid to put on paper. Her thoughts poured out in poetry, in stories, in letters she never sent but needed to write. She told me that writing made her feel alive, like she was reclaiming her own voice. I encouraged her, reading every page, marveling at how her heart spilled into ink. Her words weren't just stories, they were proof that no matter how hard they tried, no one had silenced her soul. Watching her find herself this way was like falling in love with her all over again, deeper and stronger each time, but the shadows of the past had not disappeared entirely. Sometimes, in quiet moments, we both wondered if her family still searched for her, if her father still cursed my name, if her mother still wept at night. The thought of being found lingered like a storm cloud, but we learned not to let it define us. Instead, we built new routines, new anchors. We celebrated small victories, the first time we paid rent without worry, the first meal we cooked together in our tiny room, the first time she laughed so hard she cried without any sadness hiding underneath. These moments stitched us together more tightly than fear ever could tear apart. One night, as rain tapped against the window, she lay in my arms and whispered words that cut deep into me. They tried to make me belong to someone else, she said, her voice steady, but my heart knew better. My heart knew it was yours all along. And I'll never let anyone take that from us again. The way she said it, with such conviction, such raw truth, made me realize something profound. This wasn't just about running away. It wasn't just about escaping a marriage she never wanted. This was about love defying everything that tried to crush it. It was about carving out a place in the world that didn't exist until we made it real. In that moment, holding her close while the rain fell, I understood that what we had built together wasn't fragile. It was fierce. It was stronger than hate, louder than shame, brighter than fear. They had tried to bury her beneath expectations, but love had lifted her out. They had tried to silence me, but love had given me the courage to speak louder. Together, we had created a life that wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that made it more perfect than anything else could ever be. The day everything came full circle was not marked by drama or confrontation, but by a quiet kind of peace that neither of us had ever known before. We had been in the town long enough that people began to recognize us not as strangers passing through, but as part of the rhythm of their days. The cafe had become more than a job, it had become a place where we belonged, where our laughter blended with the clinking of cups and the chatter of customers. For so long, we had lived with the weight of being unwanted in someone else's world. Now, we were wanted, not for who people expected us to be, but simply for who we were. That shift was gentle, but it felt like a revolution inside us both. One evening, as the cafe closed and the last of the chairs were turned upside down on tables, the owner looked at us with a softness that reminded me of the mothers we both wished we had. She told us she was grateful we had stayed, that our presence made the place warmer. There was no judgment, no questions, just acceptance in its purest form. After she left us to lock up, we stood together in the empty cafe, holding hands in the dim light, and she whispered, "This is what it feels like to be seen without being judged." Her words sank into me like truth written in stone, and I realized that for the first time, the battle was no longer about proving ourselves. It was about living, breathing, and thriving in the life we had carved out. The small room above the shop was still humble, the kind of place most people would overlook, but to us it became a sanctuary. We painted the walls in soft colors we chose together, hung little trinkets we found at markets, and filled it with plants that she loved tending to. Slowly, it began to feel like a home, not just a shelter. Every corner of that room carried our fingerprints, every object held a story, and every night spent there became a thread in the fabric of our life. I watched her laugh more freely in that space, her shoulders finally dropping the weight they had carried for years, and each time she smiled at me, I knew we had built something worth every sacrifice, but perhaps the most powerful moment came on a day we hadn't planned for. We had gone into the fields beyond town, just to walk and breathe, our hands linked as the breeze carried the scent of wildflowers around us. She stopped suddenly, looking out at the horizon with eyes that shimmered like they were seeing the world for the first time. "Do you realize," she said softly, "they tried to erase this part of me? They tried to make me belong to a man, to silence everything that makes me who I am. But here I am, with you, alive and unbroken." Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the strength it took to acknowledge the truth. I turned her toward me, pressing my forehead to hers, and said, "They never stood a chance against your heart. And now the whole world has to live with the fact that your love chose me." We kissed there in the fields, under a sky that seemed to stretch endlessly, and for the first time, it didn't feel like we were running anymore. It felt like we had arrived. Love was no longer rebellion, it was simply our reality. There was no audience to fight against, no parents to defy, no walls to scale. It was just us, two souls who had refused to be torn apart, standing in the open and breathing without fear. That kiss was more than passion, it was freedom sealed in a way that no one could undo. The life ahead of us was not going to be easy, we both knew that. There would always be whispers in the world, always those who judged, always challenges waiting. But we also knew something else. We had already faced the worst of it, already survived attempts to crush us, already proven that our love was stronger than the cages they tried to build. With every step forward, we carried that victory in our bones. We carried the knowledge that no matter where we went, as long as we held on to each other, we were unstoppable. That night, back in our little room, as the world outside grew quiet, she curled into my arms and whispered one last thing before drifting to sleep. "They tried to take my life from me, but you gave it back. They tried to marry me off, but I found my forever in you." Her words settled deep into my soul, and I knew then that this was not just a love story, it was a story of survival, of defiance, of building something beautiful from the ashes of what tried to destroy us. I lay awake long after she closed her eyes, listening to her steady breathing, and I realized that love had not only saved her, it had saved me too. It had given us both a reason to keep walking, to keep dreaming, to keep choosing each other every single day. And as dawn began to paint the sky in soft shades of gold, I kissed her hair and whispered into the quiet, "We made it. And we'll keep making it, together."